Hey guys, tonight we trudge back to a time when Christmas wasn't all tinsel, fairy lights, and pre-recorded jingles blasting from every shop. Imagine stepping out into a world coated in frost, where every breath forms little clouds, your boots crunch through icy streets, and your nose nearly freezes off before you reach the warmth of any hearth. You probably won't survive this if you're expecting soft, cushioned traditions. Medieval Christmas was as raw as it was magical. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Go ahead and post your location and local time in the comments. I'd love to see which corner of the world you're creeping into the past from tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The air in medieval Europe in December is biting, relentless, almost tactile. You trudge along narrow lanes where snow rarely lies thick, because the city doesn't bother to clear it. You hear the occasional clatter of wooden cart wheels on cobbles, the shouts of vendors packing up for the day, and the faint bleating of a stray goat that's more concerned with warmth than Christmas cheer. Winter isn't just a season, it's a state of survival. You pull your cloak tighter, trying to ignore the icy bite on your cheeks, and you notice the little ways life has adapted. Windows stuffed with straw for insulation, communal fires that smoke the night air, and doorways carved with protective symbols to scare away wandering spirits. Historians still argue whether these signs were meant purely for superstition or whether they also reflected a very practical sense of neighborhood insurance. Inside homes, the smells are a mix of practicality and attempted festivity. You step into a peasant's cottage, where the smoky aroma of burning wood combines with simmering cabbage and the faint, sweet scent of honey bread, more for sustenance than indulgence. A sprig of holly might hang above the door, not because anyone really believed it could talk to spirits, but because someone remembered last year's tale of sickness avoided by greenery. Interestingly, in some regions, they even used boughs of juniper to fumigate the rooms. You probably wouldn't guess that what feels like a rustic charm also doubled as insect repellent. You notice the hierarchy even in these small spaces. The father sits near the fire, claiming the prime portion of bread, while children huddle closer to the smoke, learning early the rules of survival. Outside, noble estates are preparing too, though on an entirely different scale. You'll get there soon, but for now, feel the intimacy of frost, candlelight, and whispered anticipation. The days leading to Christmas are as much about enduring the cold as they are about celebrating anything. You might think of it as a prelude, the world waiting with bated breath, each flake of snow a tiny drum roll towards something larger. You can almost hear the collective, silent heartbeat of Europe. Markets lie dormant or half-packed, and people are measuring their stores of grain, ale, and salted meat. Hunger is never far from anyone's mind, and yet, there's a peculiar glimmer of hope threaded through these harsh days. Historians still argue whether this hope was religious, social, or just the human habit of insisting on joy despite frostbitten toes. You watch children daring to dash between huts, laughing at risks you'd personally avoid, while older villagers tuck themselves near fires, murmuring prayers and sharing scraps of news. And so, you step into medieval December fully aware that this isn't the cozy, ornamented Christmas of your Instagram feed. This is a season of sharp air, smoky warmth, and cautious joy. You might notice the way the candles sputter, casting shadows that make the corners of rooms feel alive, almost mischievous. You learn, even in these first moments, that medieval Christmas is as much about endurance as celebration, and that each frost-laden breath carries the weight of centuries of human anticipation. The bells start early. You hear them before you even see the church, low, sonorous tolls vibrating through the cobbled streets, rattling the windows of sleepy cottages and the tall, stern walls of stone cathedrals alike. Each peal marks not just the passing of hours but the steady, almost ritualistic approach of Christmas. You trudge closer, feeling the vibrations in your chest, and realize that this is more than mere signaling. It's a communal drum, a heartbeat that syncs everyone to the rhythm of Advent. Some towns ring bells thrice daily, others only for matins and vespers, but always, the message is unmistakable: prepare, reflect, and maybe, if you're lucky, indulge a little before the feast. Historians still argue whether this obsessive ringing was a way to unite the faithful spiritually, or to exert social control over restless townsfolk. As you step into the parish church, the scent of tallow candles hits you immediately. It's sharp, almost acrid, but oddly comforting. You notice that some of the candles are enormous, carved in spirals or engraved with tiny saints, while others are little stubby things that flicker desperately in the draught. Inside, the congregation is a patchwork of humanity: peasants in woolen tunics, merchants with slightly more fashionable cloaks, and the occasional burgher who can afford both gloves and manners. Everyone is crouched, kneeling, or shuffling in the pews or along the stone floor, depending on their place in the social order, all bound together by anticipation of a night that promises warmth, ritual, and perhaps the thrill of the unknown. Outside the church, Advent is measured not by the convenience of modern calendars but by practical routines. Markets are quieter, or at least more orderly, as families ration their resources for the coming celebration. You trudge past stalls still offering preserved fruits, nuts, and dried fish, noting the sharp contrast between scarcity and abundance. Merchants hang fragrant boughs of juniper or fir to mask the less savory odors of winter, creating an olfactory collage of anticipation and survival. A fringe practice you might notice: some households smear ash in the windows or scatter it across thresholds, believing it would confuse evil spirits, or perhaps just make the home look unusually well swept. Medieval logic rarely bothers to separate superstition from domestic hygiene. You also witness fasting in full swing. For nearly a month, meat is largely forbidden, and people are reduced to fish, beans, and hard bread, though the rich find loopholes in ways that would make any modern dietitian faint. In certain regions, fasting rules are broken with almost theatrical stealth. Salted fish may be boiled in lard, bread dunked in wine, and all of it consumed under the approving gaze of a morally flexible priest. You feel the tension of hunger and anticipation coiled tightly in the streets, a suspense that rivals any contemporary thriller. Historians still argue whether this kind of ritual abstinence genuinely heightened spiritual reflection or simply created a more dramatic appetite for the eventual feast. And then there's the soundscape. Oh, the soundscape. The church bells are joined by the scratch of quills as monks prepare sermons, the low hum of the organ, and the occasional sneeze or cough that travels like an unscripted percussion. Outside, a dog barks at the clatter of carts, children shriek while testing icy puddles, and somewhere a blacksmith hammers at a horseshoe with the rhythmic insistence of a metronome. You might even notice townsfolk singing small hymns while performing daily chores, a practice historians sometimes dismiss as minor, but that you realize adds layers to the anticipatory atmosphere. As you move through this world, you start to notice the patterns: the careful timing of services, the cadence of prayer and chant, the deliberate positioning of candles and wreaths. You even catch a few whispers among villagers about omens, like the belief that seeing a comet on the eve of Christmas might predict the harvest's fate, or whether it's just an excuse to stay indoors and drink more mulled ale. The boundaries between faith, fear, and festivity blur. Every footstep you take echoes against stone walls that have witnessed centuries of devotion, superstition, and human impatience. You begin to appreciate that Advent is not merely waiting, it's preparation in every sense: spiritual, social, and culinary. Each church bell is a reminder that the world is turning slowly toward a single, shared moment: the arrival of Christmas Day. The air is thick with incense, expectation, and a pinch of frost creeping through the cracks. And even though it's only December, you feel the pulse of communal life tightening around you, like the slow winding of a clock about to strike its most eagerly awaited hour. You step into a peasant cottage, and the first thing that hits you is the smell: wood smoke, damp straw, and something sweet but barely noticeable, like honey slowly caramelizing over a small fire. The hearth is the center of life here, a small island of warmth in a sea of chill. You crouch near it, letting your fingers graze the rough-hewn logs, and notice the little traditions woven into the daily grind. Sprigs of holly and ivy hang above the doorway, not only to celebrate the season but also, according to local superstition, to keep away mischievous spirits that roam during the long winter nights. Historians still argue whether these customs originated from pagan rituals or were simply practical ways to lift the spirits in dark months. The interior is cramped but bustling. You spot a mother kneading bread, her hands coated in sticky dough that smells faintly of rye and caraway seeds. Children play nearby, their laughter mixing with the occasional crackle of the fire, a reminder that joy can survive even in scarcity. There's no polished furniture here, just benches, a rough table, and straw mattresses, but everything has its purpose. Curiously, some houses even feature small tokens above the fire, like a dried flower or a carved figure, believed to protect the family from misfortune. You smile because, for a moment, you recognize that human need to create magic in the ordinary. Food is scarce yet symbolic. You watch as the family prepares pottage, a thick, often grayish stew of vegetables, grains, and the occasional piece of salted meat. On special nights, such as Christmas Eve, they might add honey, dried fruit, or a little bit of ale, making the dish taste like luxury. Quirky as it seems, some households even sprinkled flour over the floor on Christmas Eve to ensure that fairies would not disturb the household, a practice that historians still debate as either genuine belief or playful tradition to amuse children. You notice the rhythmic clatter of ladles against pots, the hiss of water hitting hot stones, and the scent of roasted root vegetables, its sensory overload in the gentlest way. The hearth also provides entertainment. Around the fire, people tell stories of saints, local legends, or strange occurrences in the village. You hear one old villager mutter about a ghostly figure that only appears on Christmas night, then wink mischievously at the children, who listen with rapt attention, half fearful, half thrilled. Some stories include animals behaving oddly during the season, such as cattle kneeling in the stalls, which was recorded in some chronicles, though historians still argue whether these accounts were meant to be literal or metaphorical. You can't help but lean closer, wanting to hear every word, feeling that strange warmth that comes from shared imagination. Decorations are subtle yet purposeful. Sprigs of evergreen are everywhere, not because anyone is worried about Instagram aesthetics but because greenery symbolizes life enduring through the cold. The addition of ivy or mistletoe adds a hint of ritual. Kissing under it was not exactly a scandalous holiday tradition yet, but it hinted at connections, social contracts, and simple amusement. You notice a small bowl of nuts and dried fruit on the table, probably saved for special guests or as an offering to the household spirits, a quirky reminder of how medieval people wove belief and practicality together seamlessly. In these homes, preparation is a blend of survival and celebration. You see clothes mended meticulously, straw bedding refreshed, and firewood stacked in deliberate patterns, each act a quiet prayer that the family will endure the long winter. Children practice small songs or recite lines from plays that might be performed later for neighbors or local lords, a quirky mix of education and entertainment that seems almost modern in its ingenuity. Historians still argue whether these practices were widespread or unique to particular regions, and you realize that your presence here makes you witness to both the ordinary and extraordinary. You also notice that the cold outside heightens every sense. Each crackling flame, every flicker of candlelight, every scent from the pot simmers deeper into your consciousness. You imagine the night stretching endlessly, the dark pressing against walls, the wind moaning through the cracks, and yet, inside, life pulses vividly. People speak in low tones, punctuated by laughter and occasional coughs, building a rhythm that feels like it might be older than the village itself. It's intimate, chaotic, and profoundly alive, exactly what Christmas in medieval peasant homes is meant to be, a fragile, beautiful pause in the harshness of winter, a bubble of warmth against the frost. By the time you leave, you carry with you the mingled scents, sounds, and stories, the odd mix of superstition, practicality, and festivity that defines this season. You step outside again, brushing snow off your cloak, and realize that even in the harshest conditions, humanity has a way of celebrating resilience. This is the smell of pine, fire, and quiet joy, the olfactory memory that will stick with you long after you trudge back into the streets. You wander into the winter markets, and the first thing that hits you is the noise. It's a low hum, like bees trapped in a wooden box, punctuated by shouts, laughter, and the occasional scolding. Stalls are tightly packed, wooden frameworks draped with rough cloths, some patched together from whatever fabric the merchant could scavenge. You smell the sharp tang of smoked meats, the heavy sweetness of dried fruits, and the faint but insistent aroma of tallow candles burning in small clusters. Some merchants hang sprigs of juniper or holly to draw customers in, or perhaps to keep away whatever mischief spirits might be wandering. Historians still argue whether this was superstition, advertising, or just a mix of both. The people are equally eclectic. You see peasants, merchants, wandering minstrels, and the occasional noble in disguise, slipping through the crowd with curiosity and a sense of adventure. You brush past a boy trying to sell dried figs, his teeth chattering, his fingers red with cold, and you can't help but admire his determination. Nearby, a woman offers hand-knit gloves, and the rich aroma of herbs, cinnamon, and cloves drifts from a spice stall. Quirky as it seems, some traders sell small tokens designed to ward off bad luck or promote fertility, tiny charms shaped like animals or abstract symbols that look completely out of place to your modern eye but were serious business for some townsfolk. The markets aren't just for shopping, they are social theaters. You notice groups whispering about local gossip, disputes over debts, and who owes whom a favor. Children dart between legs, playing pranks or trying to snatch a candy or nut if they can. You hear the occasional bard singing snippets of songs about saints or heroic deeds, his voice echoing against the stone walls of nearby buildings. Historians still argue whether these performances were spontaneous or organized by the town council to maintain morale. Either way, they create a sense of continuity, a shared culture threading through the chaos. Food dominates many stalls. You spot salted herring, smoked sausages, almond cakes, and spiced wine, each one a luxury for different social classes. You notice people bargaining fiercely, their breath forming tiny clouds, gloves forgotten as they wrestle over a single nut or a small loaf of bread. The cleverest vendors have little pyrotechnics, a small flame that makes sugar shimmer, or a bell tied to a jar of roasted chestnuts. Quirky, yes, and surprisingly effective. You can almost imagine the sensory overload, sweet, sour, smoky, metallic, all mingling together in a swirl of winter life. You also observe the preparation for festivities. Some merchants lay out small gifts, carved wooden animals, tiny bells, or embroidered cloths. Most are simple, but their presence suggests a burgeoning sense of Christmas exchange, even among those too poor to afford anything extravagant. The idea of buying presents is still developing. Many gifts are symbolic, practical, or even slightly odd. A local cobbler, for instance, is selling a wooden spoon carved with intricate designs, a gift for the kitchen, for good fortune, or maybe just a clever way to clear out stock. The sounds of commerce mingle with other sensory surprises. A dog barks at a spilled basket of apples, a cart wobbles dangerously over uneven cobblestones, spilling firewood, a musician tries to coax a few coins from a skeptical passerby. You almost stumble into a small troupe performing a short play about a saint, the audience laughing at exaggerated gestures and dramatic flops. Historians still argue whether such street performances were sacred teaching tools or purely entertainment. Either way, you feel the rhythm of life, chaotic but strangely structured, moving with the pulse of winter anticipation. Despite the bustle, there are quiet corners too. You find a vendor selling handmade candles, each one flickering softly, casting shadows that make the whole market feel alive, almost mischievous. A child tugs at your sleeve, pointing to a gingerbread shaped like a tiny man, its icing already chipped. You notice the way people pause, if only for a moment, to savor something sweet, a break from the harsh winter. The market becomes a living story, a mix of survival, tradition, and fleeting indulgence that only exists this time of year. By the time you leave, you're aware of something subtle. This is more than a place to trade goods. It's a space where social bonds are tested, where superstition and entertainment collide, and where every smell, sound, and gesture signals that Christmas is approaching. You carry with you the lingering sense of smoke, spice, and roasted chestnuts, a mental snapshot of a world teetering between scarcity and celebration, survival and anticipation. You realize the market is not just preparation, it is, in itself, heart of the festival, a communal heartbeat echoing through every lane and alley. You finally glimpse the nobles preparing for Christmas, and the contrast is immediate and almost dizzying. Where the peasant houses smelled of wood smoke and pottage, the castles smell of roasting meats, polished wood, and a faint trace of perfume strong enough to make your eyes water. You trudge up a gravel path leading to towering stone walls, your boots crunching against frost-hardened ground, and the gates swing open to reveal a world of excess you can hardly imagine. Ale barrels are stacked in corridors, venison hangs in smoke-filled kitchens, and the larder is crammed with dried fruits, nuts, and cheeses that would feed a village for weeks. Historians still argue whether this display was primarily about celebration or the sheer intimidation of wealth and power. Inside, servants move like ghosts, their feet muffled on thick rugs, their hands balancing trays heavy with delicacies. You notice roast swans glistening under silver platters, pies with crusts intricately patterned, and spices so aromatic that the scent practically hums. Quirky as it sounds, some kitchens would keep live peacocks in cages nearby, their feathers later added to the presentation of the banquet to impress guests, a flourish that seems extravagant to the point of absurdity. You can't help but notice the energy, the nervous excitement, and the subtle chaos hiding beneath the polished veneer of order. The halls themselves are decorated in ways that would rival any modern Christmas display. Evergreens hang from beams, their scent mingling with the aroma of roasting meats. Tapestries depict biblical scenes, hunting expeditions, or family lineage, and some even include cleverly hidden seasonal jokes or caricatures of absent neighbors, little Easter eggs of medieval humor. You notice that the windows are shuttered not just against cold but also to create a darker, more intimate atmosphere illuminated by candlelight. Historians still argue whether this dramatic use of light was intended to awe visitors spiritually, socially, or psychologically, or perhaps all three at once. You find yourself observing the meticulous planning that goes into hosting the feast. Tables are arranged to reflect hierarchy, lords and ladies at the high table, favored knights and retainers nearby, and servants strategically placed to ensure efficiency without drawing attention. You see cups engraved with family crests, salt cellars carved from alabaster, and goblets filled with spiced wine. A quirky tidbit: some noble households employed people specifically to carve ice into decorative sculptures, a luxury completely unknown to the common folk outside these walls. You can almost hear a modern influencer drooling at the thought of content opportunities here. Entertainment is as structured as the feast itself. Musicians rehearse, jugglers practice with flaming torches, and jesters perfect acrobatic flips to amuse the diners. You hear the delicate plucking of a lute, the booming rhythm of a drum, and occasional laughter from practice sessions where someone inevitably slips on straw strewn across the hall. Historians still argue whether this entertainment was purely for amusement or a subtle display of the host's wealth, influence, and mastery of social hierarchy. Either way, the nobles' Christmas is performance-led upon indulgence, each act designed to impress both guests and posterity. In the kitchens, you watch cooks in long, flour-dusted aprons orchestrate a symphony of smells and motions. Pies are baked with hidden fillings, meats basted repeatedly, sauces seasoned with the rarest imports like saffron and cinnamon. A quirky anecdote: some kitchens would hide small charms in pies, tiny figures or coins, so whoever found them would have good luck for the coming year. You can imagine the delight and confusion of an unsuspecting guest, or perhaps the cautious fear of a devout diner. You also notice the careful preservation of resources. Barrels of salted fish, cured hams, and dried fruits are stored not just for the immediate feast but for a 12-day celebration that will require almost ceaseless consumption. You trudge past stacks of wine, ale, and mead, feeling the weight of privilege pressing down like a second layer of stone walls. Even the smallest detail is deliberate: napkins folded in particular shapes, seating charts reflecting alliances, and decorations that convey subtle messages to those who understand the codes. By the time you leave the castle, you realize the noble's Christmas is both a sensory spectacle and a careful choreography of power. It's about warmth and indulgence, yes, but also about messaging, social, political, and religious. You carry with you the smells of roasted meats and spiced wine, the sounds of laughter and lute, and the faint, almost dizzying sense that Christmas here is not just a celebration but a declaration. You step back into the cold, your senses still ringing from excess, and you understand that in medieval Europe, Christmas was a festival of extremes, scarcity and abundance, fear and joy, humility and ostentation all tangled together in the long winter nights. You watch as the Lord of Misrule takes the stage, and the world suddenly tilts sideways. One moment, everything seems rigidly ordered, the high tables, the polished floors, the meticulous placement of goblets and silverware, and the next, chaos flares, carefully orchestrated yet exhilaratingly unpredictable. The Lord of Misrule is appointed to preside over a period when social hierarchies are inverted, servants tease lords, jesters mock the wealthy, and merrymaking sometimes verges on the absurd. You might witness a baker crowning himself king for a day, issuing silly edicts that everyone pretends to obey. Historians still argue whether this temporary reversal was purely festive or a way to safely release social tension that otherwise could erupt dangerously. The room bursts into laughter as minor servants stage mock trials, using wit to lampoon their superiors. You see a jester leap onto a table, juggling apples while a chambermaid loudly proclaims the virtues of winter cabbage over fine venison. It's absurd, it's brilliant, and it's fleeting. The rigid structures of hierarchy are loosened, if only for a short while. Quirky practices abound. Sometimes the Lord of Misrule is literally a commoner chosen at random from the streets, someone whose entire life is flipped upside down for the entertainment of the elite. You can't help but think that this sounds like a medieval version of a prank reality show, though with slightly more dignity involved. The merrymaking is multisensory. Laughter ricochets off stone walls, mugs of spiced wine slush dangerously as revelers toast and cheer, fiddles and lutes provide a soundtrack that feels both chaotic and precise. You notice people whispering and watching carefully. Everyone wants to participate without falling too far out of favor. Some even indulge in gentle horseplay, throwing small snowballs indoors or engaging in harmless dares. Historians still argue whether the Lord of Misrule was a unifying ritual for the community or simply a sanctioned period of license to humiliate the less powerful. You're drawn to the more curious traditions. Some lords and ladies would dress in the garb of lower classes, swapping their silks for rough wool, engaging in mockery that skirts the edge of social commentary. You notice that servants sometimes play along, pretending to command, issuing playful punishments that everyone laughs at, yet no one forgets the real social order waiting for the next morning. Quirky anecdotes abound. One tale tells of a Lord of Misrule who declared all animals equal citizens for the day, leading to the barn animals being ceremoniously represented in court. You stifle a laugh, realizing that even medieval absurdity required a sense of ceremony. The Lord of Misrule is not just entertainment, he's also a cultural release valve. By allowing the inversion of roles, the society grants everyone a brief taste of freedom from constraints, a reminder that even the most rigid systems can bend under the right conditions. You notice, too, that some towns would choose someone notorious for mischief as their ruler for a day, almost like appointing a living joke to remind people not to take authority too seriously. Historians still argue whether these rituals were moral teaching devices, satirical commentary, or simply pretexts for revelry, and maybe, as you watch, it's all three simultaneously. You follow a small procession through the hall, servants and apprentices parade in comical costumes, masks hiding their faces, rattling noisemakers, and waving small branches. Everyone cheers, including the nobles, who laugh louder than they might admit. Quirky as it is, some towns even had mock battles or ceremonial duels between chosen participants, more theatrical than violent, adding a layer of spectacle that fills both hall and courtyard. You can practically feel the room vibrating with anticipation, chaos, and the thrill of temporary liberation. By the time the Lord of Misrule's reign winds down, you realize that this is more than comic relief. It's a deeply social practice that allows a community to step outside its rigid routines, reminding everyone, from the lowest servant to the highest lord, that laughter, absurdity, and temporary subversion are integral to human life. You step outside into the cold air afterward, feeling the contrast, the quiet tension returning like a soft sigh. The snow crunches underfoot, and you carry the echo of laughter, jingling bells, and the faint, lingering scent of spiced wine, a reminder that even in the strict hierarchies of medieval Europe, joy sometimes finds its way through. As night deepens, you feel the shadows stretch longer across streets and alleys. Christmas Eve in medieval Europe is a time when superstition and devotion dance together, and you notice it almost immediately. Lanterns flicker in doorways, casting jittery shapes that make walls appear alive. You trudge along frozen paths, hearing the wind whistle like a warning through narrow lanes, and you remember the old tales: spirits roam freely tonight, saints watch silently, and misfortune can strike in the unlikeliest moments. Historians still argue whether the heightened sense of fear on Christmas Eve was a religious tool or simply an adaptation to the winter darkness, which has a way of making every creak and gust seem sinister. In homes, you notice rituals designed to ward off evil. People sprinkle salt around thresholds, hang protective herbs, or leave small offerings to appease household spirits. You might even glimpse a family whispering prayers to their patron saint, or performing quiet acts of penance. The combination of anticipation and apprehension is tangible, like an invisible thread pulling at everyone's nerves. Quirky practices abound. In some regions, people would burn old shoes in the hearth, believing the smoke could confuse wandering ghosts, or perhaps just clear out the lingering smell of damp straw. You can't help but chuckle quietly, though the tension keeps you alert. The church bells strike again, deeper now, marking the final hours before midnight. You trudge toward a candlelit chapel and notice that windows glow with flickering light, silhouettes bending and swaying inside. The air smells strongly of tallow, incense, and lingering warmth from countless fires. You stand just outside, hearing whispered prayers and muted hymns, and the sense of anticipation is almost unbearable. Historians still argue whether these communal vigils were meant primarily for spiritual reflection or to enforce social cohesion among parishioners, but either way, the effect is mesmerizing. Outside, the wind carries strange noises: a dog barking, the muffled shuffle of a traveler, and the eerie creak of snow-laden branches. Villagers share hushed conversations about omens. A crow perched on the church steeple is said to signal the arrival of a particular fortune or misfortune. A sudden gust of wind through a window might indicate a wandering spirit. You observe children clinging to their parents' skirts, eyes wide, while older villagers smirk knowingly, blending superstition with sly amusement. Quirky traditions include throwing beans or small coins into the fire to encourage prosperity, an act both practical and symbolic. Food preparation continues in near silence. Families stir thick stews, baste meat for the next day, or prepare small treats that will mark the season. The smells are intoxicating: roasting chestnuts, spiced wine, honeyed bread. You watch as someone carefully arranges a modest platter of fruit to ensure the household will be blessed in the coming year. Historians still argue whether these offerings were meant primarily for divine favor or as a ritualized form of mindfulness, reinforcing social and spiritual norms at a time when superstition and piety were tightly interwoven. In the streets, travelers move cautiously, aware of the supposedly wandering spirits. You notice how even the mundane is transformed. An icicle hanging precariously from a roof becomes an omen, a crow hopping across the square is a messenger. Some communities enforce quiet during the night, believing noise might attract unwanted attention, while others embrace the chaos, using firecrackers or noisemakers to frighten away evil. You find it fascinating how fear and celebration coexist, each enhancing the other. By the time the hours inch toward midnight, the sense of mystery thickens. You feel your heartbeat sync with the flicker of candlelight and the muted murmur of prayers, aware that you are part of a long continuum of humans negotiating darkness and light. You understand that medieval Christmas Eve is not just preparation for a feast. It's a liminal space, a threshold where the familiar world meets the unknown, where superstition, hope, and devotion intermingle like smoke from the hearth. And as you trudge home, brushing snow from your cloak, you carry with you the lingering tension, the faint aroma of incense, and the quiet thrill of anticipation, knowing that the night is far from over. You step into the church just as the first notes of the midnight mass begin, and it feels like stepping into another world. Candlelight flickers across stone walls, casting shadows that seem to dance with a life of their own. The air is heavy with incense, a fragrant haze that clings to your clothes and hair, mingling with the faint chill from outside. You find yourself wedged among parishioners, kneeling peasants, nervous children, and the occasional noble trying to look humble, and immediately feel the power of shared anticipation. Historians still argue whether the overwhelming sensory experience of midnight mass was intended primarily to inspire awe, instill devotion, or subtly reinforce social hierarchies. The choir begins to chant, low and resonant, vibrating through the vaulted ceilings. You notice the priest's robes glinting faintly in the candlelight, embroidered with gold thread that catches each flicker. The words are Latin, mostly unintelligible to the average listener, but the melody, the rhythm, and the sheer presence of the ritual make meaning almost irrelevant. Quirky as it seems, some parishes use small bells during the consecration to awaken the spirits of the devout, a practice that may have more to do with auditory theatre than theological necessity. You feel a shiver run through you, partly from the cold, partly from the intensity of the moment. Everyone is packed together, the crowd pressing in from all sides, creating a hum of whispered prayers, shuffling feet, and rustling robes. You notice the children craning their necks to see over adults, some secretly chewing a piece of honey cake, others fascinated by the flicker of candles or the movement of the choir. Outside, the wind howls against the thick stone walls, as though nature itself participates in the ritual, amplifying the sense that you've crossed into a liminal space. Historians still argue whether these dramatic environmental factors, sound, light, temperature, were deliberately manipulated by medieval clergy to heighten devotion or simply coincidental. The sermon begins, and the priest's voice rises and falls with measured cadence, drawing you in. You hear stories of the Nativity, of saints' lives intertwined with the anticipation of Christ's birth, and of moral lessons that sometimes seem lost in translation but resonate through the gestures and tone. Quirky anecdotes sometimes sneak in. A monk may recount how a cow knelt on Christmas Eve, a tale historians still debate as allegorical or literal. You notice people nodding seriously, half in belief, half in polite attention, as if the line between faith and performance is intentionally blurred. The Mass is punctuated by ceremonial gestures that feel almost like a dance. Candles are lit in procession, incense is swung in wide arcs, and the choir moves to different sections of the church, shifting the focus of attention. You feel the rhythm, the rise and fall of voices, the flickering shadows, and realize that the ceremony is designed to engulf every sense. Some parishes even incorporated small fireworks or flares in outdoor spaces to mark the hour, a quirky addition that surely made for a dramatic visual spectacle. Communion, when it arrives, is a deeply tactile moment. You see parishioners approaching, hands cupped or mouths open, receiving the wafer and wine. The shared act of receiving sustenance, however spiritual, also reinforces community. You notice the nervous tremor of some first-timers, the reverent calm of the elderly, and the subtle satisfaction of those who understand the symbolism. Historians still argue whether these rituals primarily fostered piety, social conformity, or a mixture of both, but there's no denying their impact. As the Mass continues, you become aware of the long night stretching before you. People whisper blessings, exchange small gestures of kindness, and quietly observe the oddities of the ritual, the priest's exaggerated bow, the choir's perfect synchronization, the flicker of candlelight on gold embroidery. Quirky interactions abound. A child may try to sneak a piece of candle wax home for luck, or a young noble may sneak a glance at a friend across the pews. You can't help but notice how human behavior weaves through the sacred, binding community, superstition, and devotion into a single, immersive experience. By the time the Mass ends, a hushed reverence lingers in the air. You step out into the crisp night, hearing the distant echo of church bells, seeing the faint glow of candlelight through windows, and feeling that almost holy exhaustion that follows intense ritual. The winter sky above is vast and dark, dotted with stars, and you realize that this is the culmination of anticipation, superstition, and devotion, the spiritual apex of medieval Christmas. You carry with you the scent of incense, the warmth of candles, and the profound, almost cinematic sensation that history has folded around you, creating a moment you'll not soon forget. You sit down at the long, groaning table and brace yourself for the feast. The first thing you notice is the sheer volume of food. Roasted meats glisten under candlelight, pies rise like domes from the table, and platters of salted fish, root vegetables, and fresh bread compete for space with bowls of spiced wine. The aroma is intoxicating, smoky, sweet, herbal, and slightly acrid all at once, and you realize that this is not just a meal, but a performance, a ritualized indulgence that pushes both stomach and patience to the limit. Historians still argue whether the medieval Christmas feast was more about religious devotion, social display, or sheer hedonism. You notice the hierarchy immediately. Nobles sit at the high table, their plates overflowing, while retainers and servants cluster at benches along the sides, ready to refill goblets and replace empty platters. You watch as a servant carefully carves slices of roasted boar, their knife glinting under the flickering candlelight, and realize that every gesture here carries meaning. Each pour of wine, each careful presentation, each clink of a spoon is both practical and symbolic. Quirky as it seems, some dishes include hidden surprises, a coin in a pie, a bean in a pudding, so whoever finds it is destined for luck or perhaps a mild, humorous embarrassment. The feast is not gentle on the stomach. Meat courses follow one another in a relentless procession: venison, goose, swan, pork, and sometimes even peacock if the household is extravagant enough. You note that medieval cooks often used sweet spices like cinnamon and nutmeg liberally, partly for flavor, partly to mask the taste of meat that may have been preserved for weeks. You also notice the practicalities. Pies are heavy, bread is dense, and sauces are rich, everything designed to provide both sustenance and spectacle. Historians still argue whether these lavish meals were genuinely enjoyed or endured as a moral and social obligation. Conversation at the table is lively and often theatrical. Toasts are offered with exaggerated gestures, jokes circulate, and minor insults are volleyed playfully across the benches. You watch a young lord spill wine on a noblewoman's sleeve and barely avoid the consequences through wit alone. Quirky customs abound. In some regions, diners would balance spoons on their noses between courses or attempt to perform small feats of skill while eating, a way to show dexterity and perhaps earn minor bragging rights. You chuckle quietly, realizing that much of the spectacle is performative, as much about amusement as consumption. You notice the rhythm of service. Servants move like clockwork, refilling cups, clearing plates, and presenting the next course. Occasionally, a jester or musician interrupts to entertain, playing a loud note or performing an acrobatic flip to keep the energy high. The clamor is punctuated by laughter, occasional coughs, and the scraping of utensils. Historians still argue whether this orchestrated chaos was meant to impress guests, keep diners awake and attentive, or simply maintain a festive mood throughout the 12-day celebration. Some dishes carry symbolic weight. Fish often appears on Christmas Eve, adhering to fasting rules, while the first meat course on Christmas Day is sometimes ritualized to mark the triumph of abundance over austerity. Nuts, fruits, and honey cakes punctuate the meal, each bite a reminder of nature's bounty. Quirky yet fascinating, some households include marzipan sculptures of animals or saints, blending artistry, indulgence, and a hint of pagan symbolism. You realize that every plate tells a story, every flavor carries meaning beyond simple nourishment. As the night stretches, laughter deepens, glasses clink more insistently, and the sense of shared indulgence grows almost tangible. You notice the subtle interplay of hierarchy, ritual, and merriment, the nobles carefully moderating their behavior, the servants delighting in minor triumphs, the children staring wide-eyed at the spectacle. Historians still argue whether the communal nature of these feasts strengthened social cohesion or simply reinforced inequalities, but you can't help but feel that, for one night, the world bends slightly toward equality under the influence of food, drink, and shared human delight. By the end of the feast, you're exhausted just from watching. The candles burn low, the room smells of roasted meat, spilled wine, and warm bread, and you realize that the medieval Christmas meal is a test of endurance, appetite, and social intelligence all rolled into one. You step away from the table, feeling both satiated and slightly overwhelmed, carrying with you the sounds, smells, and sights of a celebration that is as much about spectacle as it is about nourishment, a vivid memory of human indulgence frozen in winter's chill. You wander into the streets after the feast, and the night feels different now, denser, more charged. Snow crunches beneath your boots, reflecting candlelight and the occasional torch carried by townsfolk. The air is crisp, almost electric, and you notice the way shadows stretch and bend against walls, creating an otherworldly theater that seems to play out just for you. Villagers are still out, some stumbling home from the feast, others lingering to exchange a few words or admire the decorations. Historians still argue whether these nocturnal wanderings were spontaneous expressions of joy or carefully monitored rituals meant to preserve order. Children dart around with tiny lanterns, their laughter echoing off the stone buildings. You notice some are playing simple games, rolling hoops along the street, tossing sticks, or challenging each other to leap over icy puddles. Quirky customs appear as you watch. A group of boys might bang pots and pans together, believing the noise drives away evil spirits, while a girl tosses a sprig of holly into the fire for good luck. You grin at the thought that in this moment, superstition, play, and celebration blend seamlessly into one chaotic symphony. Street performers add another layer to the sensory experience. You see minstrels singing short, repetitive songs, jesters performing acrobatics, and storytellers recounting tales of saints, dragons, or clever peasants who outwitted the local lord. Their voices carry across the town square, intertwining with the crunch of snow, the distant barking of dogs, and the occasional clatter of carts. Historians still argue whether these performances served a primarily religious, educational, or entertainment function, but you can feel their impact. The communal heartbeat of the town is alive and pulsing. Food vendors remain, though quieter than earlier in the day. You smell roasting chestnuts, honey cakes, and spiced wine being poured into mugs. Some vendors sell simple toys or charms, tiny wooden figurines, coins wrapped in paper, or small embroidered cloths meant as gifts. Quirky practices abound here too. A young boy might toss a nut into a passerby's hat for luck, or a merchant might hang a small figurine above a stall to attract fortune. These little interactions add a sense of intimacy and playfulness amidst the communal celebration. You notice the subtle rituals of households along the street. Lanterns in windows flicker in rhythm with hearth fires inside. Families kneel briefly to say a prayer before sleeping or leave offerings for wandering spirits, and a faint hum of carols drifts from open doors. Historians still argue whether these private rituals were meant primarily for spiritual protection, community cohesion, or simply the quiet pleasure of participating in tradition. Regardless, you feel the invisible threads connecting each home, each passerby, and each child at play into a single tapestry of shared anticipation and reflection. The night air also carries the scent of snow and smoke, blending the natural and human-made into a single sensory experience. You hear someone in the distance whistling a tune, another coughing, and the low creak of shutters rattling in the wind. Quirky superstitions abound. Some believe that spilling water outside could summon frost demons, while others insist that stepping over a broom laid across the path will bring good fortune. You marvel at the way belief, habit, and imagination shape human behavior in ways both subtle and profound. You watch as a small group of villagers gather around a bonfire in the square, tossing sticks and singing songs that have been handed down for generations. The flames reflect in their eyes, casting shadows that dance across the snow. You realize that the communal aspect of this night, shared warmth, shared laughter, shared vigilance against both cold and spirit, is what makes it unforgettable. Historians still argue whether these gatherings had primarily religious, social, or psychological significance, but as you stand there, feeling the warmth and hearing the rhythm of voices, it doesn't matter. The night itself is alive, a living testament to human resilience, creativity, and joy during the darkest season. By the time you trudge back toward your lodging, the world feels transformed. The same streets that seemed cold and unwelcoming earlier now pulse with quiet life, the echoes of laughter, song, and ritual lingering in your mind. You carry with you a sense of connection, a vivid memory of human celebration, and a subtle awareness that medieval Christmas is more than a feast or a ceremony. It is an immersive, multisensory journey into the heart of community, superstition, and joy. You wake on Christmas morning to a world transformed. The snow glistens under pale sunlight, and rooftops sparkle with frost that seems almost magical. Inside the houses, the air is filled with warmth from the hearth, lingering smells of last night's feast, and the faint sweetness of spiced cakes and roasted nuts. You trudge along narrow streets, brushing snow from your cloak, and notice that the energy of the town has shifted. There's a calm, deliberate joy, a sense that the long night of anticipation has reached its climax. Historians still argue whether this morning exuberance was primarily spiritual, communal, or simply the release of tension after long months of winter hardship. Families gather for small morning rituals. Children wake with excitement, eyes bright, eager to see any gifts left by parents or local benefactors. You notice modest treats, a carved wooden animal, a small loaf of bread, or a simple toy, carefully placed, often symbolic more than lavish. Quirky as it seems, some households would hide small coins in the straw of the children's beds, claiming that the Christ child had left them during the night. The joy here is subtle, intimate, and entirely human, a quiet complement to the loud feasts and chaotic celebrations of the previous night. The church bells ring again, softer this morning, calling parishioners to a day of reflection and modest celebration. You trudge past doors decorated with sprigs of holly and ivy, noticing that even the simplest homes display an effort to mark the season. Some villagers pause to leave offerings at a small shrine or under a tree, grains or fruits meant to invite blessings for the year to come. Historians still argue whether these practices originated in pagan traditions or were fully integrated Christian customs, but either way, the symbolism is unmistakable: life, hope, and endurance through winter. You notice neighbors exchanging greetings, offering small tokens of goodwill, or sharing a bit of food with someone in need. The sense of community is tangible. Unlike the noisy indulgence of the feast, this morning is about connection, reflection, and quiet joy. Quirky practices abound. In some villages, children would dress in costumes of saints or animals, going door to door to receive small treats, a precursor to modern caroling traditions. You watch as laughter dances lightly through the air, mixing with the cold, creating a strangely sweet contrast to the solemnity of the morning prayers. The meal today is simpler but no less meaningful. You see pottages and breads reheated from the previous night, small portions of roasted meats, and stewed fruits for dessert. Families eat together, enjoying the modest abundance with gratitude. Historians still argue whether the simplicity of Christmas morning was intended as moral instruction, encouraging humility and moderation, or simply a practical adjustment after the excess of feasting. Either way, you feel the slow rhythm of life returning, the quiet satisfaction of shared survival and celebration. Outside, you notice quiet rituals continuing. People sprinkle salt or scatter seeds for good fortune, hang ornaments made of straw or twigs, and occasionally pause to admire the frost patterns on their windows. You realize that every gesture, however small, carries meaning, a blend of superstition, faith, and human creativity. Quirky traditions, like banging pans to awaken spirits of the household or tossing coins into the fire, remain, providing color and amusement in a world that could otherwise feel austere in winter's grip. By midday, townsfolk begin to move toward local gatherings, small plays, communal singing, or storytelling sessions under the warming sun. You feel the blend of ritual, entertainment, and social cohesion, and you recognize that this day's joy is sustained not by food or drink alone, but by human connection and the careful weaving of tradition. Historians still argue whether this community-centered approach to Christmas was primarily spiritual, social, or a clever way to survive winter's isolation, but you know it works. Warmth, laughter, and shared purpose make the cold day feel less harsh. As you walk through the streets, carrying the sounds of singing, the smell of roasting chestnuts, and the sight of children playing, you realize that medieval Christmas is not a single event, but a continuum: anticipation, ritual, feasting, merrymaking, and reflection all flowing seamlessly together. The morning is a gentle extension of the night, offering calm after exuberance, intimacy after spectacle, and a chance to savor the resilience of a community thriving against winter's chill. You wander into the countryside as the afternoon light softens, and the rhythm of medieval Christmas reveals yet another layer. Farms and small holdings are quiet, save for the occasional crowing of a rooster or the lowing of cattle, and you feel the deep contrast between urban bustle and rural stillness. Families tend to their hearths, prepare simple meals, and ensure that animals are fed and warm. You notice that Christmas in the countryside is less about spectacle and more about sustenance, care, and symbolic gestures, a reflection of both practicality and devotion. Historians still argue whether rural celebrations influenced urban ones or if cities created trends that gradually trickled outward. You pass cottages with smoke curling from chimneys, and children peek from frost-lined windows, eager to see the few visitors that wander in the snow. Inside, families gather to sing simple carols, exchange small gifts, or play games that have been passed down for generations. Quirky traditions persist. In some villages, children might leave out a plate of food for wandering spirits or leave their shoes near the hearth to be blessed overnight. These small, personal rituals feel intimate and earnest, a quiet counterpoint to the elaborate feasts of the nobles. The rural feast is humble but thoughtfully prepared. Stews bubble in iron pots, coarse bread is sliced generously, and milk or ale is poured into wooden mugs. Every household seems intent on sharing with neighbors, whether through simple visits, shared meals, or leaving food outside for travelers and the less fortunate. Historians still argue whether this generosity was inspired more by Christian teaching, social obligation, or practical community survival strategies, but the effect is clear: the bonds of local society are strengthened by participation in shared rituals. You notice the rhythm of work and play intertwined. Some adults are repairing tools, mending clothes, or tending animals, while children chase one another in the snow, laughing and occasionally tumbling into drifts. The countryside feels like a living tapestry, the mundane acts of survival interlaced with gestures of celebration. Quirky customs include mock processions of young men dressed in animal skins, sometimes singing or dancing to honor the season, blending pagan echoes with Christian observance in ways that historians still debate. Outside the villages, you glimpse small shrines or crosses adorned with greenery, sometimes with offerings of grain or fruit. These sacred markers are reminders of faith embedded in daily life, and they provide a focal point for reflection, blessing, or community gatherings. You notice that even the most practical households incorporate small decorations, whether sprigs of holly, ivy, or simple carvings, suggesting that the symbolic layer of Christmas permeates every corner of life. As evening approaches, the countryside settles into a quieter rhythm. Hearth fires glow softly through windows, and you hear the occasional murmur of a lullaby or a soft carol. Quirky yet charming traditions continue. A young boy might hide a nut in a friend's shoe for luck, or families may scatter straw on the floor as a symbolic gesture of humility and remembrance of the manger. You realize that these small acts, repeated year after year, carry the same weight and meaning as the grandeur of urban feasts. They are the heartbeat of tradition, intimate yet powerful. You walk past a frozen pond where children test their balance on thin ice, laughing when someone slips. Farmers check livestock one last time before the night, ensuring warmth and safety. The rhythm of labor, celebration, and superstition is seamless, a continuous cycle that mirrors life itself. Historians still argue whether these rituals preserved social cohesion, reinforced morality, or simply offered joy amidst hardship, but you notice that the outcome is the same, a community woven tightly together through shared experience. By the time night falls, the countryside glows faintly under moonlight. Lanterns flicker in windows, smoke rises in steady columns, and the quiet hum of life feels almost sacred. You understand that medieval Christmas in rural areas is quieter, slower, and more reflective, but no less rich, a tapestry of survival, faith, and delight that complements the urban chaos you've seen earlier. Every gesture, sound, and smell is a note in the enduring symphony of human celebration. You trudge back toward the village center as night deepens, and the sense of ritual reaches its gentle, lingering conclusion. Streets are quieter now, illuminated only by lanterns and the occasional torch carried by a neighbor returning from late visits. The snow muffles footsteps, making each sound deliberate and significant. You notice that people move slowly, exchanging quiet words, giving small tokens, or pausing to admire simple decorations in windows and doorways. Historians still argue whether these late-night rituals were meant for spiritual reflection, community bonding, or the enjoyment of an uninterrupted, almost sacred silence. The hearths burn low inside cottages, casting long, flickering shadows across the walls. Families sit together in humble warmth, sharing stories or humming carols softly to themselves. You notice children curled under blankets, occasionally peeking at the faint glow of candles before closing their eyes in sleepy wonder. Quirky customs linger in these intimate spaces. In some homes, parents leave small gifts for the household spirits or sprinkle crumbs for wandering animals, blending superstition and kindness. You can almost hear the subtle rhythm of life, slowed by the day's festivities but still humming with warmth and vitality. You glimpse small gatherings outside homes, neighbors visiting one another to share leftover food, exchange small handmade trinkets, or recount amusing stories from the day's celebrations. The laughter is soft, a gentle echo rather than the raucous noise of earlier. Historians still argue whether these social rituals primarily reinforced social norms, provided moral lessons, or simply offered comfort in the long winter nights, but you feel their power in the ease of voices, the sparkle of eyes, and the shared sense of humanity. The night air carries a mixture of smoke, pine, and lingering scents from the day's feasts. You walk past a small chapel, where a few devout parishioners whisper final prayers before resting. Quirky rituals persist. Some toss small pebbles into the fire to ward off evil, others leave their shoes out in hope of a blessing, and a few mischievous children attempt a final game of hide-and-seek, giggling quietly at the danger of being caught. These small acts, though seemingly insignificant, create a sense of continuity, connecting past and present, ritual and play. You notice that townsfolk move with purpose, yet with a deliberate gentleness, as if the day's intensity has seeped into their bones. Doors are carefully closed, animals checked one last time, and fires banked for the long night ahead. The quiet hum of activity blends with distant singing, the occasional creak of a shutter, and the soft whistle of wind over rooftops. Historians still argue whether the careful balance between action and stillness during Christmas night was primarily symbolic or a practical adjustment to winter conditions, but the result is undeniably evocative, a moment suspended in time. As you wonder, you see the subtle imprints of community and faith, a child's small toy placed on a windowsill, a sprig of holly tucked into a doorway, a quietly hummed carol floating from a chimney. The quirkiness of human creativity is everywhere, from playful antics to symbolic gestures, revealing the seamless blending of imagination, tradition, and devotion. You realize that these small, often unnoticed rituals carry the same weight as the grand feasts and spectacles, embedding the spirit of Christmas into the very fabric of everyday life. By the end of the night, a deep sense of closure settles over the village. You feel the pulse of shared humanity, the quiet endurance of faith, and the delicate balance between superstition, ritual, and joy. The flickering candlelight, the snow-dampened streets, and the warmth radiating from each hearth coalesce into a sensory memory that lingers, a subtle testament to the depth and richness of medieval Christmas celebrations. You follow the trail of candlelight to the great hall one last time, where remnants of the feast remain and the echoes of laughter linger in the heavy, cold air. The tables are cleared, yet traces of the previous night's indulgence cling stubbornly, sticky patches of spilled wine, crumbs of bread, and the lingering scent of roasted meats and sweet spices. You notice the careful clean-up by servants, moving silently now, their steps measured and efficient after the chaos of celebration. Historians still argue whether the labor following the feast was viewed primarily as duty, penance, or simply part of the social choreography of Christmas. You observe the nobles retiring to their private chambers, exchanging polite farewells and gestures of gratitude. The high table, once a scene of lavish excess, now looks almost austere under the dimming light, reminding you of how fleeting grandeur can be. Quirky practices persist. Some households leave tiny thank-you gifts for the kitchen staff, often scraps of sweetmeats or carved trinkets, acknowledging their unseen labor. You can't help but smile at the small human touches, gestures that soften the rigid social structures you've been observing. Outside the hall, you notice that the town is gradually emptying. Visitors have returned home, travelers have resumed their journey, and the streets are dotted with the occasional lantern swinging in the cold wind. You hear the faint creak of gates closing, the shuffle of boots over frozen paths, and the distant barking of a dog. Historians still argue whether the deliberate pacing of post-feast activity was meant to extend the sense of communal participation or simply maintain order in the aftermath of indulgence. You turn your attention to the quieter, more reflective customs that persist after the feast. Families may kneel before a small altar, recount blessings received, or whisper prayers for the coming year. Children, still wide-eyed with excitement, replay games from the previous day, their laughter subdued yet persistent. Quirky yet telling, some households will leave a small candle burning for wandering spirits, a gesture that blends superstition, tradition, and a very human desire to honor the unseen. The night stretches long and cold, and you trudge along paths glimmering with frost. You notice how homes are arranged for warmth and protection, fires banked, animals safely enclosed, and lanterns placed to guide anyone passing through. There's a palpable sense of endurance in these small acts, a recognition that Christmas is not just about revelry but also about survival, care, and the careful threading of daily life with ritual. Historians still argue whether these practices were primarily religious, practical, or a combination of both, but you can't help but admire their resilience. The interplay between spectacle and simplicity is clear. While the feasts, masks, and ceremonies dazzled in great halls, the quieter, smaller acts, like leaving a coin in a pie, lighting a candle, or blessing livestock, carry a subtler but no less important weight. You watch as villagers tuck themselves into bed, children clutching small gifts, parents sharing quiet conversation, and servants reflecting on a night of frantic labor that is finally winding down. Quirky anecdotes surface in your mind. A cat that stole a piece of meat during the feast, a child who found the coin in the pudding, a noble who tripped over a loose rug and was laughed at discreetly. These details bring warmth, humor, and humanity to the otherwise solemn close of celebration. By the end of the night, everything feels suspended in a fragile balance, warmth and cold, light and shadow, chaos and calm. You carry with you the echoes of music, laughter, prayer, and ritual, the full spectrum of human experience condensed into a single, immersive holiday. Medieval Christmas is revealed not as a single event, but as a flowing, layered, multisensory journey, where grandeur, humility, superstition, and devotion coalesce to leave lasting impressions on all who participate. You step outside just before dawn on the final day of the festival, and the world is quiet in a way that almost feels sacred. The snow has settled into a sparkling, untouched carpet, reflecting the first pale light of morning. You notice smoke curling from chimneys, a few early risers shaking frost from their cloaks, and the distant lowing of livestock beginning their day. Historians still argue whether the calm after Christmas was seen as a spiritual moment, a practical pause, or simply a natural rhythm following the long series of feasts, rituals, and merrymaking. Villagers begin their small, deliberate morning routines. Some carry baskets to the market, others check on neighbors, and a few go to the chapel for final prayers. You notice the quiet joy of children recounting their favorite moments, the thrill of finding coins in pudding, daring exploits during the Lord of Misrule's antics, or the thrill of skating across thin ice without falling. Quirky traditions linger. A stray piece of food is left outside as an offering, or a small twig is planted in honor of good fortune for the new year. These actions are tiny yet meaningful, tying personal experience to community belief and history. The countryside hums with a different rhythm than the towns. Farmers inspect livestock, repair tools, and prepare meals for the day. You see families quietly exchange small gifts or share leftover food with neighbors and travelers, reinforcing bonds that extend beyond mere survival. Historians still argue whether these rural customs influenced urban practices or were entirely independent, but their core remains the same: acknowledgement, gratitude, and subtle celebration. Even in the quiet, playful moments persist. Children mimic adult rituals, pretending to officiate small masses for toys, tossing miniature pies into the air, or enacting small skits inspired by the Lord of Misrule. You notice that humor and imagination blend seamlessly with devotion and tradition. Quirky stories abound. One child claims their doll slept under the Christmas tree with the spirits, another swears they caught a glimpse of the winter solstice ghost, a tale historians still debate as allegorical or literal. The day unfolds slowly, allowing reflection and the gentle fading of excitement. Families prepare modest meals, light small fires, and share quiet conversations. The frost clings stubbornly to windows, and a soft wind carries the scent of pine and smoke. You realize that the long festival of medieval Christmas, anticipation, rituals, feasting, merrymaking, and reflection, culminates in this delicate balance between exuberance and calm, chaos and contemplation. As evening approaches, the village glows faintly in the remaining light, and you feel the full arc of the holiday. Candles flicker, snow crunches under careful footsteps, and the sense of shared humanity settles deep into the bones of the community. You notice the interplay of superstition, devotion, and joy, all woven together into a rich tapestry of tradition. Historians still argue how much of this survived consciously versus unconsciously, but the rhythms and rituals speak clearly. Human beings need celebration, reflection, and connection to navigate both winter and life itself. Finally, as night falls and the last embers of fires glow, you feel the gentle, encompassing quiet that marks the end of medieval Christmas. It is a quiet filled with memory, with echoes of music and laughter, of prayers whispered and stories told, and with the subtle hum of life itself, a rhythm that endures across generations. The festival may end, but its lessons, its joy, and its peculiar charms linger, a reminder that celebration, in all its forms, binds people together more than any law or hierarchy ever could. Now, the pace slows. You sink into the comfort of a warm room, feeling the lingering chill of winter softened by the memory of fires and candlelight. The sounds of distant bells, the quiet murmur of voices, and the faint crackle of dying embers drift softly through your mind. Snowflakes outside glide silently, untouched by footprints, and you realize that the world has shifted from celebration to reflection. The smells of roasted meat, spiced wine, and pine still linger faintly, mingling with the warmth of a crackling hearth. You think of the children snug in their beds, the servants finally resting, and the elders recounting the tales that keep tradition alive. Even the quirks, the coins in pies, the mischief of the Lord of Misrule, the whispered superstitions, blend seamlessly into this calm, leaving a gentle smile on your face. The night stretches longer, soft and expansive, a quiet exhalation after the exhilaration of the festival. Every ritual, every gesture, and every laugh becomes a subtle echo, a thread connecting the past to your imagination. You feel the depth of human experience, anticipation, indulgence, devotion, and connection, all woven into the tapestry of medieval Christmas. Let the flickering candlelight and the soft hum of memory carry you gently toward sleep. The cold, the chaos, and the joy of celebration fade slowly, replaced by quiet warmth. You are left with a lingering sense of human creativity, resilience, and the enduring power of community. And in that stillness, with eyes growing heavy and mind alight with images, you understand the timeless magic of Christmas as it was once celebrated, centuries ago, in stone halls and snowy villages alike.